Hello, so my name's Helen Chambers. I'm a publication manager at Costello Medical Consulting in Cambridge, and I'm here today to present to you some research conducted by some of my colleagues entitled Know Your Audience, Informed Decision Making in Congress Submissions. So I should point out this research was recently presented at the European Medical Writers Association Spring Conference held in Munich in Germany last month. So just to give you a bit of an overview of some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to introduce the concept of abstract resubmissions, so exactly what they are and why a pharmaceutical company, for example, might want to resubmit their data. Then I'm going to touch on Good Publication Practice Guidelines, GPP3, and what they have to say about abstract resubmissions. And then I'm going to talk about the research that my colleagues conducted, which is looking to see whether you can really know in advance of a congress the typical audience that you might expect and the typical audience who might see your research. So abstracts, I'm sure lots of you are familiar with abstracts, but in case you're not, they are basically a short summary of data. And when I talk about abstracts here, I'm mainly talking about abstracts from industry-sponsored research, from pharmaceutical companies, reporting data from clinical trials. So for a pharmaceutical company, these offer a really important opportunity. They allow that company to publish a short piece of their data, of their findings from their trials, out in the public domain where people have access to it without having to wait for the full manuscript development process, which can go on for months, can then require multiple journal submissions, and can take some time. To add to that, most major conferences now actually publish their abstracts either online or in a formal journal supplement, so that data can be cited, and that can be really important for a pharmaceutical company. With that in mind, pharmaceutical companies quite often want to resubmit their abstracts to additional congresses, so once they've been presented once, they want to submit them to several others, and that's what I want to talk about today. So abstract resubmissions, or retreads, kind of have two sides of the coin. On the plus side, and for the pharmaceutical company, they allow their data to be more widely disseminated to reach a far greater audience. So, for example, if you send one abstract to multiple congresses in different geographic locations, it's quite likely that you're going to reach different audiences. That in turn leads to increased publicity and product awareness, and that can be particularly important in countries with different marketing authorizations for your drug. And it can also allow translation of the data. So if you're submitting to a regional congress, it can allow more of a local audience whose first language might not be English to really hear that data. On the flip side, if a congress is publishing a lot of resubmitted abstracts which have been shown elsewhere, then that can detract from the novelty and the impact of the congress. And it can also have copyright implications, so if the data has already been published or if the copyright transfer has been made to a previous congress. And finally, it can raise questions around authorship. So, for example, some congresses will require the presenter of the poster or the oral presentation to be a registered author. And in some cases, especially for minor congresses, the original authors might not be planning to attend, which raises the question of, do you add an additional author just to go and submit and present that data? And obviously, good publication practice does provide some guidance on that, although I'm not going to go into it now. So GPP3 Guidelines, Good Publication Practice Guidelines, updated last year, do provide some specific direction on this, and they state that Congress guidelines should be followed for abstract submissions and presentations. Authors should disclose prior presentations at other congresses if the abstract submission allows for that, and they should include the trial registration number if possible. Really the key part of this, I think, is the second part, which is that a repeated presentation of the data to different congresses is permissible to reach different audiences, provided that the Congress permits this encore presentation and copyright requirements are respected. So the bit that we focused in on was this idea of reaching different audiences. And what we wanted to know was whether it's really possible to know in advance of going to a Congress who the typical audience are likely to be, the demographics of the delegates, and whether by resubmitting your abstract there you are actually likely to reach a different audience. So we identified 8 different disease areas to look at, and these were rheumatology, hematology, oncology, endocrinology and metabolism, gastroenterology and hepatology, neurology, urology and cardiology and vascular disease. And these all represent quite major disease areas with a lot of active drug development going on, which pharmaceutical companies might be interested in. Then across those 8 disease areas, we looked at the Conference Authority database, which is published by Silogent online, and we identified the top 10 congresses, so the largest in each of those 8 disease areas, giving us 80 congresses overall. And then we just looked to see what available information there was online regarding the delegates for each of those. As well as just looking to see if there was information, we tried to hone that down a bit more and looked at the specific things that people might be interested in. So we looked at the number of abstracts that they accept, the countries and or the regions with the most attendees, the total number and the number of scientific attendees, the age range, and then their practice specialties, their work settings, their distribution of degree levels, and their primary interests. So we really wanted to build up a picture of the demographics of all of the delegates. And we found, so about 80 congresses across 8 disease areas, 10 in each, we found that only half had any delegate information available at all, so half published absolutely nothing in advance of the conference. And of those half that did publish something, of those information categories, on average, they gave about 4 pieces of information, so not a huge amount available. The congresses that we found were geographically spread, so they were across America, Europe, APAC, and then global congresses, which is where the location changed year to year. And really, America and Europe form the majority of those. In terms of size, these dark lines across the middle represent the median number of delegates, and you can see that the American congresses tend to be the largest, but there was a huge diversity in terms of the size of the number of attendees across all the regions. And then when we looked at whether they published information at all, we found again America was kind of on top, so 82% of those congresses made some information available, compared to around about a third of APAC and global congresses. When we looked at the congresses that did provide information, again, America was on top. They came out with, on average, about 5 pieces of information. The others all slightly lower. So not a huge amount of information available to anyone trying to choose a conference to submit to. Of those pieces of information, the ones that were reported most frequently, massively the total number of attendees, and also the top countries, as you might expect. So then we looked into specific disease areas. So across these 8 disease areas, 10 conferences in each, we looked at the size, and we found that oncology, gastroenterology, and cardiology tended to have the largest conferences, although again, huge spread in terms of size, just in terms of number of delegates. And then when we looked at the information provided, we found quite a difference. So oncology conferences are quite good at publishing information in advance. 100%, 10 out of 10 published something. Urology, only 1 conference gave any information at all. When we looked at the number of pieces of information, it was fairly even across all of them, 3 to 5. So then finally, we looked at the number of attendees. So we found that in our sample, conferences with 15 to 20,000 people were 5 to 10,000 people, were the most common. But as you might expect, as the number of attendees increases and as the conference grows in size, they become better and better at publishing that information in advance, right up to 100% of the conferences with more than 20,000 attendees made some information available. And similarly, when you look at how much information they make available, it improves with the conference size. So basically, in summary, we just want to say that for the majority of disease areas, it would be quite difficult to know in advance the typical audience of a particular congress using only that publicly available information. Congress size has the greatest impact on the extent of the delegate information disclosed. So larger congresses tend to make more informative attendance reports. But most congresses still only disclose the total number of attendees or the top countries and regions. On average, American congresses are the largest amongst those that we looked at, and that probably explains why their reports were also the most informative. So really greater transparency in the disclosures of Congress attendance information, and particularly in APAC and particularly in smaller congresses, would really help stakeholders and pharmaceutical companies and industry to evaluate if submission of the same abstract to multiple congresses adds any valuation to their publication plan. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I'm from Costello Medical, and you can find out more either by contacting me or by contacting Ricardo, who conducted the research. Okay, thank you for listening.